Want to take a look behind the scenes at the making of Frozen 2? Well, Disney Plus has you covered with a new documentary show on Disney Plus. The first episode starts as a year out from the release, and I'm going to break it down after the intro. Well, hello there. My name's Jeremy and welcome back to Freeform Disney, where I talk about all aspects of Disney, from the animated movies to the theme parks to Star Wars, Marvel, and Pixar, and the TV shows, and everything else in between. And that is why it's Freeform. And keep coming back every day for new daily content. If you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Today we're looking at Disney's latest documentary over on Disney Plus, and it's called Into the Unknown: Making Frozen 2. It's a 6-episode docuseries exploring the final year of the production and making of Frozen 2. Now, unlike the Disney Gallery The Mandalorian documentary series, all 6 of these episodes are all available right at once, and they're generally somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes long. Also, this Making Frozen 2 docuseries seems to be more like a 6-parter of one longer documentary, and follows the production chronologically, although there are still definitely some distinctions between the 6 and the stories that they are telling. Now, I'm not going to talk about the entire 6 episodes here today, as that would be a really long video and would take quite a while for me to make, so instead of that, I will be just talking about the first episode here, and I'll talk about the other 5 in videos to come over the next few weeks. So strap on in, because it's time to break down the first episode, which is titled quite straightforwardly, A Year to Premiere. Here's what went down. We went ahead and talked a lot with co-director and writer for Jennifer Lee throughout this episode, and that makes sense. I imagine that won't just be this episode, because she is the main person to talk about if we're talking Frozen. So she goes ahead and talks about how much Anna and Elsa mean to her and all the pressure and expectations that were involved in making this sequel. And she didn't actually find it scary to jump in, which I thought was intriguing. But it got scarier and scarier as it got closer to actually coming out. And especially with some of the troubles of just trying to make those last pieces of the puzzle fit together. I mean, that makes a lot of sense right there. Dang, the stress you'd be under for that, right? I thought one of the interesting things we learned here was that long before she wrote the screenplay or even started on it, she wrote a diary from Elsa's perspective to go get herself more in the head of Elsa. Just a neat little thing, and just how much she lived with that character before coming to this point and making that decision. And it was a decision she and her co-director Chris Buck really went ahead and made together because they felt there was more to tell. While Let It Go was very freeing, and well, there was still more, and that's really where you get to the song Show Yourself, which is the core of this movie, and also one of the biggest problem childs they had in trying to figure it out and how the heck to make it work in the movie. And we talk a little about that trouble at the end of this episode, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more throughout the other episodes as we go, because it takes them a little while to figure that one out. Now, while we're talking about the two of them, I also will comment, I love their working style. It's intriguing how one comes from a writing background and the other from an animation background. So you have the one thinking in words and the other thinking in drawings as far as how they look at the movie and how they look at their creative story. And that just seems like it complements each other really well when you're going into animation. I've got to imagine that's a nice connection right there. So we're jumping in over at about the 11th month mark, which, bear in mind, they've already been working to some degree for 3 years, although with less people way back at that point in time. Some of that's the early stages of concepts and writing. And, well, we're at this point, and they've been doing screenings every 3 months or so, and they'll keep doing that. And in these screenings there, over at Disney Animation, you've got all these other directors and writers, and some other people sometimes too. And I've got to say, that's one of the really neat advantages of working in a studio, is you have a whole lot of other people to give you great feedback, people that are very versed in this exact kind of work that you're doing. So very, very nice. And so they head into the room, watch the screening, and then they head off to a conference room after that, where they go ahead and have what they call the story trust. And that's where everybody gives their reactions and largely tears the dang thing apart so you can rebuild it and make it even better. And frankly, looking around that room was just kind of a who's who in Disney animation, as you just see all the different people in that room. definitely one heck of a brain trust, not just a story trust right there. One of the intriguing bits of feedback they got during that was there was apparently some feedback about the movie being too dark early on. That was an interesting feedback. I'd be curious to see exactly what the darker aspect was to Frozen 2 at that point that was pushing it that direction. Or maybe it wasn't really that it was that much darker, but it was just how the whole thing flowed together. Hard to say without knowing the rest of the critique or what the story looked like at that moment. But I'd be curious to see this darker version of Frozen 2. Oh, and I'll interject here and note, as was noted in the episode as well, that Jennifer Lee, in case you're not aware, she is also currently the Chief Creative Officer for Disney Animation, which she took over those duties not all that long ago. And so then she ended up having to juggle her duties as director and writer of Frozen 2 along with being Chief Creative Officer and over top of all of the different Disney animation work that's being done. And whew, there's some duty juggling right there. And while we're talking about her as Chief Creative Officer, I'm really curious to see the direction that she ends up taking Disney Animation during her time in charge as Chief Creative Officer. We really haven't gotten to see the shape of that yet. She's really been in charge of Disney only over the course of time of 2 movies as they were released, although with the amount of time that movies are in production and have started, they both started well before she was Chief Creative Officer, that being Wreck-It Ralph 2, i.e. Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like as it goes on. For instance, Raya and the Last Dragon will be the next one coming up, which still was started before she was Chief Creative Officer. We will be seeing, and I'm definitely curious. So then we got to jump on forward up to 10 months to premiere, and we got to go see good old Kristen and Bobby, the Lopez's, a husband-wife team who work on all the great songs and the score of both this movie and Frozen, amongst other things that they've worked on too over their careers. And I mean, they do one heck of a job, but it was really fun to get to see how they really play off of each other. And you can even see that they have their own shorthand in how they talk to each other because they've worked together for so long. And I also remember reading that they really hated having the cameras in their apartment and that they made sure to do some of their more mundane songwriting work before the day that the cameras would come each week so that there would be something more interesting to put on camera. And so it was fun to watch them work together and work on one of the songs in there. In this case, the song that we're working on was Some Things Never Change, which segued us very nicely into the next section where we went off to a recording session and brought in a bunch of the actors to go do their parts in Some Things Never Change. So we got to see Idina Menzel, Kristen Bell, Josh Gad, and also Jonathan Groff was off in New York going ahead and singing his part. One of the things I really liked about how they filmed this and what they did in the documentary part of it here was that we actually got to see them warming up, doing their vocal warm-ups. It's not always a part you're going to see in a documentary. And heck, we even got to see a little bit of practice with the vocal coach in there. And so that was a nice bit of behind-the-scenes content that I enjoyed seeing. And I also enjoyed watching some of the interaction we had from the songwriters and the directors and how they interacted back and forth with the cast and seeing a bit of that direction on the fly as it's going. Again, just a nice piece. I mean, we were kind of a fly on the wall, just like Josh Gad was while Kristen Bell was singing. Oh, and Idina Menzel, throughout this entire episode, we see a lot of her and really enjoyed everything she was adding there. I mean, she's a huge veteran as far as all the actors are concerned, and she's got all kinds of little tidbits that just add to what we get to learn as the audience throughout the episode. Like for her, and this is how she does her singing, which is she uses her hands to help her hit the notes the way she wants. And I think there's at least one of the others that definitely does that too. I mean, if you watch Jonathan Groff over there, it looks like he was doing something similar. Well, then we moved on and we talked a good bit with the animation department and really got to watch some of that animation work go. So we dropped in on Wayne Unten, who's the animation supervisor specifically regarding Elsa. And he was also that same role back in the first Frozen, so he's got a lot of experience with what Elsa is like as a character, visually speaking. Now, each character has hundreds of controls to go ahead and control them, just like little puppeteers working on them. And there can be somewhere like 70 animators working on a single character. And that's the other part of why the animators are really important, because they go ahead and make sure that it is continuous throughout, that that character really is themselves, even though 70 different people worked on putting them together. So when you look at those end credits and see all those animators, all those animation supervisors, etc., there's a lot of work going on there. And we also focused on one of the animators specifically as well, and that was Mallory Walters, who was working on one of the Elsa sections, specifically the section at the very end of Into the Unknown. And we go ahead and talk to her a bunch, and we get to watch that section really get reworked a little bit. And it was really neat to see a bit of the workshopping process that went in there. We got to see her working on it in the first place. We got to see it taken over to the dailies. And if you're not aware of what dailies are, at the end of each day, the directors, the producer, etc. will go ahead and watch all the new work that was put together that day and then be able to give feedback and commentary on it. So that's a process that just happens every single day right there. And that means we got to go ahead and see that scene and get it reworked and actually got to see a number of the different visual states that scene was in as well, and some of the reasons for reworking different pieces and what was working well and what wasn't. And just got to see some of the people work and how they go about their jobs. And that's a ton of fun, really. Oh, and I'll also add this little comment because it came up in there. So our good old animator Mallory Walters commented on how much she really looks up to Jennifer Lee and sees her as a pioneer in amongst the industry. And frankly, she is. And she also commented on how long it takes for things to change. And if you look around some of those rooms and see, shall we say, all the white people and males in amongst the upper echelons of the company there, yeah, it does take a while. Oh, and to close out that animation section, we had this really fun bit where Idina Menzel was coming into the studio that day because she was recording some lines for a toy that was going to come out later. And I just love both her excitement and how her presence affected everyone else around her. It's clear that most of the other people are a little in awe of her, although they actually tend to hold it together pretty well. Heck, I'd probably be a little in awe too. As an actor who's done musical theater, I've got to say her work is inspiring. So from there, we moved on to an orchestra recording session, and that was just a ton of fun. You could see Bobby and Kristen Lopez were just in awe of the orchestra and the players. And they were over the moon to have their music they wrote recorded by the orchestra. Even though this is certainly not the first time that they've been through this process, and yet it still affects them that way each time. So, yeah, pretty cool. And then we also had the directors in there, and Idina Menzel came over in to watch the orchestration. Which, I mean, that's neat to see just how much she cares about the process and staying involved in watching. It's not like she had a reason she needed to be there, but such a passion for her craft. And as I said, I love how much hearing the music played affected everyone in the booth watching. There were a whole bunch of puffy eyes and smiling faces on that one. And I can't not mention the piece that happened next, where Wayne Newton went into a hallway where they've got a whole bunch of letters and drawings that people have sent in. And one of them was someone who talked about how Let It Go essentially saved her life, and you just saw how much that affected Wayne and how much I imagine it affects all kinds of people that were involved right there. Just to know that you can touch someone on that deep a level with something you've worked on. Yeah. Okay, so that means we're moving on to the last section, and that was 8 months to premiere, and this is all talking about show yourself here. And so we got to see one of those meetings where they were over a teleconference and they were pitching the show yourself version of what they had done over to our good old songwriters. And, well, there was a lot of heavy talk about the song and how it just wasn't working. Bobby even said something along the lines of that he's never felt it land, that he thinks it's falling apart. Which when you're 8 months to premiere is not what you want to be feeling about, especially about the core and essential piece of the movie. Because Show Yourself really is the make or break moment of the entirety of Frozen 2. It's the heart of that movie and the conclusion of the main character arc. I mean, you've got to get that piece right. And for what it's worth, I certainly think they got there in the end. But I think some of the early versions they talked about were like nails on a chalkboard. Some of the early versions, they were looking at Elsa coming over there. She would end up at a mirror where she sees kind of the perfect version of herself, and then she'd walk into it and take her true form as a Snow Queen. Yeah, ouch. And heck, they had all kinds of questions. Even by that point, they were still questioning who the voice was. Was it her destiny, her magic, Odd Hollander itself? Was it the memory of her mother? So there was a lot of questions still on that core piece of the movie at 8 months. And we ended with all of our main people really talking about how they saw the troubles here, but they were pushing onward and working to make the movie as best they could. So they knew they were still going to have to tear it apart and keep rebuilding. And hey, I think this was a good start to the docuseries. I preferred the style of Disney Gallery The Mandalorian as a documentary, and I feel that this one here with Frozen 2 was more typical of what I think I would expect in a documentary of this style. And frankly, I do like them both so far, so don't get me wrong on that. Some of the things that were great, I mean, we got to see some pieces where the people involved forgot about the cameras around them and were in their natural environment. So we were really behind the scenes at that moment. We also got to focus on a few of the processes that happen in a movie like this. And we got to hear a lot from Jennifer Lee, which I think you have to do. I think that's necessary in talking about Frozen 2. I was also glad to hear about the beginnings of the talks about the troubles with Show Yourself and some of the troubles the production really ran into. This certainly isn't unique, and it's certainly not the first production which has run into troubles and, well, ended up being beautiful in the end. Take Aladdin, for instance, famously was reworked a ton before making it to the theaters. And for a non-Disney example, I could easily talk about Casablanca, which had an incredible number of troubles, but by the end became one of the best movies ever made. There's a reason we have the phrase in the theater world that a bad dress rehearsal means a great opening night. Well, okay, they might be a little different in what we're talking about, but still the point is that it can be messy as hell and still lead to great results in the end once everything is worked out. I enjoyed this episode and I am looking forward to watching the other 5 parts. Let me know if you're interested, and I'm definitely will go ahead and make the videos for the other 5 episodes in this series. And it's that time, so what about you? Have you started or finished watching the new Into the Unknown Making Frozen 2 documentary series? Did you learn something new, or do you have a favorite part of the first episode? Let me know down below in the comments. And thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like, share it with anyone you think will too, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another new episode of Freeform Disney. Have a magical day, and may the Force be with you always.